The notes we're going to go over today are going to focus on cells and all of the little parts they have in them called organelles and the function that each of these organelles have. The first question we have here says, what is the name of the invention that better allowed us to understand what we are made of? A microscope is something that was invented that allowed us to finally look at stuff that is much smaller than what we can actually see with just our eyes alone. So we were finally able to look at cells and see what living things are made up of, and then even what's going on inside of cells. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So cells, just so we know the definition here, it's a basic building block of life. So every single living thing, no matter what it is, from a human to a very simple small bacteria cell, it is a cell. And inside of the cells, there's small little parts called organelles. And organelles just means little organs. So kind of like how the organs in your body all work together to keep you a living thing, these tiny little organelles all work together to keep a single cell a living thing as well. Upon the invention of the microscope, scientists were able to develop something that we call the cell theory. So, all living things are made up of cells. Cells are considered to be the basic unit of structure and function in living things, and new cells come from existing cells. So, you have to have other cells reproduce in some way, so mitosis and meiosis, to create new cells. So the organelles that we're going to talk about today, they are tiny membrane-bound structures that perform special functions inside of cells. This question asks us, which types of cells have many different organelles? So there's two classifications of cells. We have small, simple ones, and we have really big, complex ones. The small, simple ones would be like bacteria cells. They're called prokaryotes. They don't have as many special organelles inside of them. The eukaryotes, however, they're very large and complex. They have a nucleus, the center part where the DNA is kept safe. And plant and animal cells would be examples of this type of cell. So your cells are eukaryotic cells. They're complex. There's a lot going on in there, which makes sense because there's a lot going on in your body. You need a lot of cell parts to make things happen. So we're going to go through a list of the organelles you're responsible for knowing. As we are listening, make sure you are getting these filled out on your paper. So number one is the cell wall. This is a strong, stiff, protective barrier on the outside of plant cells, and some bacteria cells have this. Animal cells, though, would not have this extra rigid layer on the very outside. Animal cells and plant cells would have something called a cell membrane. So plant cells have a cell wall and a cell membrane. Animal cells would just have a cell membrane, but it just goes on the outside, provides just that barrier between the inside of the cell and the outside world, allows the cell to maintain something called homeostasis, which just makes that balance on the inside of the cell. Just whatever environment it needs to keep, it can maintain those levels of different molecules. The nucleus is the center of a eukaryotic cell, and this is where the DNA is found. It's considered to be the control center of the cell. The center of the nucleus is specifically called the nucleolus, and that's where ribosomes are made. On the outside of the nucleus, there's just a special membrane that we call the nuclear envelope. This is just going to protect the DNA that is found inside of the nucleus. And then a vocab word on this picture we see here is chromatin. Remember, when DNA is long and stringy and stretched out, when it's actively being used for protein synthesis, that's called chromatin. So remember that word. Cytoplasm is going to be the jelly fluid-like substance that's going to fill up all cells. Every cell, no matter what kind of cell it is, it has this gooey cytoplasm just filling up all the spaces inside of the cell. The Golgi apparatus is going to be an organelle that is kind of like the post office of the cell. It processes and packages different molecules and is capable of shipping them around the cell to get them to go wherever they need to go. And it can package things up to actually be eventually released outside of the cell as well. The endoplasmic reticulum, often abbreviated as the ER, is this kind of highway-like organelle system that will completely surround the nucleus. There's a smooth endoplasmic reticulum that does not have ribosomes attached to it, and a rough endoplasmic reticulum, which is rough due to the ribosomes that are attached to the surface. This is going to be found in plant and animal cells, and it just is really used, like I said, as a highway system to just transport things around, move them to where they need to go. Ribosomes, we have learned about these. These are very small circular organelles that are floating out in the cytoplasm, and these are the factories that make the protein molecules for a living thing. They're very important. They are essential for a cell, so these are going to be found in every single cell, no matter what type of cell it is. The mitochondria are going to be found in eukaryotic cells. They are going to create energy for the living thing. So they do this by breaking down sugar, specifically glucose sugar, and they use that to make an energy called ATP. Vacuoles are going to be used for storing things, so storing liquids, nutrients, molecules that the cell needs. It's going to be in plant and animal cells. The difference, though, is that in a plant cell, the central vacuole is very, very large, and it'll often be referred to as the central vacuole just because it's so important, very large, takes up a lot of space inside of the plant cell. Inside of animal cells, they're much smaller. The vacuoles don't take as much space, and they will store things still, but they're just a lot smaller. Chloroplasts are going to be found inside of cells that do photosynthesis. So plant cells would have chloroplasts. They're green. They're kind of an oval jelly bean shape, and they are green because of a pigment in them called chlorophyll. Lysosomes are going to be smaller circular structures that are going to be breaking down old cell parts that need to be recycled. Animal cells will have these. Vesicles are other small round structures that are used to move things around. So they can temporarily move things around, but it's not permanent storage. So these are going to move all around and just help move things where they need to go. So vesicles would be used with the Golgi apparatus. So the Golgi is the post office of the cell. It's going to package up molecules. It can then put them into these little vesicles that could move to wherever they need to go, but eventually it could get dumped outside of the cell. So it says on the screen now, vesicle fuses with the cell membrane and molecules are dumped outside of the cell. So a cell can utilize this Golgi apparatus and the vesicle structure to move things and release things when it needs to. A flagella is going to be found on some cells, animal bacteria cells. It's used for movement, so it's kind of like a long tail, whips it around, and it can use that to move. Cilia are going to be also found on the outside of a cell surface. They're smaller than a flagella. They're used for movement. They're not quite as big as that long tail-like flagella structure. All right, let's check our understanding. So what transports molecules around the cell? The endoplasmic reticulum. So that was like the highway of the cell. It is that series of folded membranes that surrounds the nucleus and it moves stuff to where it needs to go, the highway system. What is the center of a eukaryotic cell called that protects the DNA? The center of the cell, the control center in eukaryotic cells, which are the complex cells, that's the nucleus. What is this jelly bean shaped organelle that makes energy? So that's the powerhouse of the cell. It takes glucose, it breaks it down into ATP energy, and that's going to be the mitochondria. So the actual process that this organelle does is called cellular respiration. Takes sugar, uses that to make energy for your body to use. There are 4 things that all cells have. This is an important list that you definitely need to know. So every single cell, no matter what type of cell it is, has to have something that goes on the outside of it for protection. So that's going to be a cell membrane. Small spheres that are used as these little protein factories, those are the ribosomes. Ribosomes make proteins, living things, even a single cell needs to make proteins to function. So every cell has to have ribosomes. Genetic material. This is the DNA used as the directions to make proteins. So every cell has to have this genetic material. And then there has to be something inside of the cell to fill it up. So you need this jelly-like substance to just fill all the spaces. The organelles are floating in it. They're protected by it. That's the cytoplasm. So make sure you know this list, 4 things that every cell has, even if it's a small, simple prokaryote. And then the larger complex eukaryotes, like your cells, they also have these 4 things. So this concludes our rundown of all the organelles you need to know. If you need to go back to any parts of this video, just make sure you click back and ask for help if you need it.